graduate student in English literature at Wright State University. So she's used to the flu network to arrive from Dayton, Ohio. Next, we'll have Mary Catherine Russell. She's from UNC Charlotte. She's a second-year graduate student concentrating in children's literature, and she's also an officer in our Children's Light Graduate Organization. And third, we'll hear from Alex Muller. He's from Winthrop University. He's a sophomore there. He's a creative writing major and a music minor. And he wrote this paper for a class entitled Literary Merits of Harry Potter, which we're all here to celebrate. All right.
My paper is titled There Is No Good and Evil, Only Power, and Those Too Weak to Seek It. It's analysis of the cross-generational characteristics of Lord Voldemort from Harry Potter. J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series was highly praised in 1955. W.A. Auden considered it a masterpiece of its genre, and Bernard Levin wrote in Truth that it was one of the most remarkable works of literature in our or any time. It was incredibly popular, selling approximately 3 million copies around the world by 1968. The work was translated into all of the major European languages and many others, and transformed Tolkien into a cult hero. In these footsteps, J.K. Rowling presented the 7-book epic of Harry Potter. The success of Lord of the Rings is minuscule compared to the worldwide phenomenon of Harry Potter. In a New York Times article published in 2007, Rich states that in the 10 years since the first one, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the series has sold 325 million copies worldwide. So Harry Potter appeals not only to the children of today, but to the adult readers from Tolkien's generation. In this paper, I will argue that by examining the villains, Sauron from Lord of the Rings and Voldemort from Harry Potter, it's clear that Rowling used material from her predecessor, Tolkien, to create her masterpiece, yet added modern elements in order to give her series a cross-generational appeal. I will reveal these villains' similar character traits of branding possessions, the importance of and fear inspired by their name, their desire for immortality, and their fatal flaw. Whereas there are numerous parallels, key variations speak uniquely to the targeted audience. Tolkien wrote in a time when the Axis armies was a growing threat, and this fear is visible through the attack methods of Sauron's army. Rowling, by contrast, wrote in a time when the public was more afraid of train bombings than conventional battle, and terror was the key weapon of force. By borrowing traits from Sauron, yet adding modern elements of terror, Rowling created a villain that frightens adults of all ages as well as the children of today. So to start off, branding possessions. Sauron marked the orcs in his army with his symbol, the red eye. The orcs in the service of Barad-dûr used the sign of the red eye. Voldemort also marked his followers, the Death Eaters. Harry describes the mark as something like a vivid red tattoo, a skull with a snake protruding from its mouth. And Professor Snape reveals that every Death Eater had the same sign burned into him by the Dark Lord, so they could distinguish one another. In addition to branding possessions, both villains altered their names. In Lord of the Rings, Sauron did not use his right name, nor permit it to be spelt or spoken, whereas Voldemort was originally Tom Marvolo Riddle, but he violently opposed keeping his filthy Muggle father's name. Next, after they changed their names, fear of the name changes it further. In a conversation between Pippin and Beregond in Minas Tirith about the Black Riders, Pippin says, "I know of them, but I will not speak of them now, so near, and he's unable to finish the sentence. Beregond replies quietly, "So near to Mordor? Yes, there it lies, we seldom name it." Similarly, Boromir says in the Council of Elrond, "I have heard of the great ring of him that we do not name," which should sound familiar, because Voldemort, of course, is known by you-know-who, or he who must not be named. In a conversation with Hagrid, Hagrid tells Harry, "Well, I don't like saying the name if I can help it. No one does." "Why not?" Harry asks. "Gulp and gargoyles, Harry. People are still scared." And Ron explains that Voldemort, because people were so afraid to use his name, turned that to his advantage and put a taboo on his name so that he could track people. Ron tells Harry, "The name's been jinxed, that's how they track people. Using his name breaks protective enchantments. It causes some kind of magical disturbance. Anyone who says it is trackable." So the trace ensured that even those who, like Harry, were bold enough to use Voldemort's true name now had to return to you-know-who in order to evade capture. So as well as instilling fear with their name, both villains desired immortality. Sauron made a gold ring of power to rule all the rings of power that were given to men, dwarves, and elves. He made it in secret and poured his soul into it. But secretly, Sauron made the one ring to rule all the others, and their power was bound up with it, to be subject wholly to it, and to last only so long as it too should last. And much of the strength and will of Sauron passed into that one ring. So as long as the ring survived, Sauron survived. Similarly to Horcruxes, which we all know about, so I'm going to skip that. So as long as the Horcruxes survived, Voldemort would. And both of their attempts were partially successful. Sauron was, when he lost the ring, for that time vanquished, and he forsook his body, and his spirit fled far away and hid in waste places, and he took no visible shape again for many long years. In Harry Potter, Voldemort explains that when the curse backfired, when he was trying to kill Harry, "I was ripped from my body. I was less than a spirit, less than the meanest ghost, but still I was alive. What I was, even I do not know. I was as powerless as the weakest creature alive and without the means to help myself, for I had no body. I settled in a faraway place in a forest, and I waited." So even though it was incredibly difficult to destroy Sauron's one ring in the fires of Mount Doom in Mordor, and to destroy all of 7 of Voldemort's Horcruxes, and then Voldemort himself, there was hope because both villains had the same fatal flaw. They were not able to comprehend love. In Lord of the Rings, Sauron is focused on Aragorn and the army that's approaching the Black Gates. He never suspected that the ring was en route to be destroyed, especially by 2 such unlikely heroes as hobbits. For Frodo, the halfling, it is said, at the bidding of Mithrandir, took on himself the burden, and alone with his servant he passed through peril and darkness, and came at last in Sauron's, despite even to Mount Doom, and there into the fire where it was wrought he cast the great ring of power, and so at last it was unmade, and its evil consumed. It was because of Sauron's blindness that 2 hobbits and their love of the Shire and for each other were able to perform what an army of elves and men could not. Sauron never suspected this power of love. Voldemort has the same fatal flaw. Dumbledore explains to Harry, "Your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. He didn't realize that love as powerful as your mother's, for you, leaves its own mark, not a scar, no visible sign. To have been loved so deeply, even though a person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever." So despite the abundant similarities between the villains in The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, there's one key difference. Their attack methods are very different. Sauron wanted to cover all of the lands in the second darkness. His co-conspirator Saruman explains, "The time of the elves is over, but our time is at hand, the world of men which we must rule. But we must have power to order all things as we will." Voldemort, on the other hand, wanted to be the greatest sorcerer in the world, and their method of force was terror. And they just, half of the Muggle killings back when you-know-who was in power were done for fun. And whereas in Lord of the Rings they amassed a great army to attack at the Black Gates, in Harry Potter it was a military coup from the inside. So Sauron's tactics were more relevant for the time that Tolkien was writing, post-World War I and pre and during World War II. Rowling, on the other hand, wrote during the War on Terror, and her villain reflected the current fear of terrorism. Janet Croft argues that the dead faces floating just below the surface of the water, seen when Frodo and Sam traveled through the dead marshes, were a standard image in Great War memories and fiction. In addition, the fortification of Ramus Echor, the outer wall of Minas Tirith, is a reminder of the futility of the Maginot Line, in which France gave a false sense of security against German invasion. Whereas in Harry Potter, we can see that the attack methods are different and much more like terrorism. Stremmel argues that though the series explores many themes, the theme of terror as a result of large-scale national strikes and of the battle between good and evil are central to Rowling's work. Stremmel says also that Voldemort is the quintessential terrorist figure because he is, up to this point in the series, completely unambiguous. At every moment, he poses a threat to society, and his sinister actions consequently cause pain, terror, and confusion to both the magical and Muggle communities. Also within the text, there are several things that have direct correlation to the current events of today. The pamphlets from the Ministry of Magic bear a striking resemblance to the pamphlets that Homeland Security put out post 9/11. The Death Eaters spread fear in familiar ways. They destroy bridges, they murder innocents, they compel children to kill their elders. And it is this correlation between real events and the text that makes it compelling and strikes home for the readers of all ages. Also, what is interesting is how Voldemort as a villain is different in a couple different ways. Paulosaurus Faria argues that Voldemort represents a new villain archetype, one that follows the same journey as the hero, but one that does not lead to redemption. It's certainly true that readers know a lot more about Voldemort than we ever learned about Sauron, unless you read the Silmarillion. Not only does the reader know Tom Riddle's past intimately, Harry knows his past as well as his current thoughts and emotions because they've been intimately connected since Harry was a child. The only thing that Frodo knew was that he had to destroy the ring. He didn't know anything about Sauron, where he came from, how he fell. He just knew that he had to be destroyed. Not only does Harry know a lot about Voldemort, they're strikingly similar. They're linked from the very beginning, and Voldemort himself says there's a strange likeness between us after all. Even you must have noticed, both half-bloods, orphans, raised by Muggles, probably the only two Parselmouths to come to Hogwarts since the great Slytherin himself. We even look something alike. Noel Smith notices these similarities and also writes about them, arguing that Harry and Voldemort represent polarized aspects of good and evil, that is, are split part objects of the same whole object. Pipo also writes about the similarities, arguing that Harry's doppelganger, Tom Riddle, is quite an obvious manifestation of his darker side, the heir of Slytherin who possesses all those unwanted characteristics by which Harry fatalistically fears to have been tied down. So we know a lot more about the villain, and he's a lot more similar to Harry, which brings it a lot closer to home. Whereas in Lord of the Rings, you had the villains that were the Easterners. You didn't know anything about them. They were of a different country, of a different race, and they were all bad. Whereas by mingling and mixing the hero and villain archetypes, Rowling seems to respond with our time by providing readers everywhere with a hero and a villain who are above all human,